to me, it was like, okay, so my challenge this semester is to get that student interested in what we're doing.
Welcome to Classical Etc. You're in the studio with Shane Saxon.
Welcome to another episode of Classical Etc. I'm joined by my friends, Martin, Tanya, and Paul. And on today's episode, Martin doesn't actually know the topic yet. I haven't told him.
Wait, I'm the only one who doesn't know?
You're the only one who doesn't know. So before we get there, I want to ask you, Paul, what have you been reading recently?
Well, I finished Pinocchio,
Okay.
which I mentioned I'd been reading before, having finished it, I thought it was phenomenal. It's great. Every boy should read Pinocchio, and probably girls too. But
not my favorite. That long nose disturbs me.
You know, I was actually curious about that because I didn't know how much of the story of Pinocchio I knew had been Disneyfied and how much was actually in the book. And then long nose is in the book.
Yeah.
When I was in Rome, if you went into a toy store, Pinocchio just dominated. There were just lots of wooden Pinocchio toys and
That's
all
interesting.
That. Yeah, it's very...
So the Italians embrace Pinocchio.
Yes, the Italians very much
it's an Italian word, right?
Right.
Sure. Giuseppe.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And so I guess that's like their children's story.
Like when you go to Boston, make way for ducklings is everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you think some of these things, like, because kids, I think, aren't reading anymore, you go certain places, and I'm trying to think, like maybe Hannibal is one of, where just Mark Twain, there's a whole Mark Twain themed thing going on in Hannibal. But I always wonder, since kids aren't reading anymore, how long is this going to last? Because those things are going to go down the memory hole. So
they're not, though, because we are doing our part to bring it back.
Don't be
that's what we're trying to do. Don't be a Debbie Downer.
Nelly.
But also, I would say, Martin, that what would probably end up happening is people making the art, telling the stories, are going to realize people don't know these stories, even though they've been around for ages. And they'll just keep retelling those stories because
I hope so. And I agree. That's what we're doing. Saving Western civilization, one student at a time. I'll never forget that. But the reason we're doing it is partly because it needs to be done, and it's unfortunate.
That's right.
That it
Absolutely. If we didn't need to do it, none of us would have jobs.
Tanya, yeah, I was about to ask you, are you familiar with the concept of a hot take?
A what?
A hot take?
No.
You just gave one. But a hot take is when you have an opinion that's kind of surprising that other people don't have, but it maybe isn't always well reasoned, but it's just, you just shout it out there.
Or not well thought through.
So what was that opinion?
Well, just that we would all lose our jobs.
I just have these visions of us homeless, wandering around with absolutely nothing to do.
I actually thought that your hot take was about Sabatini, and that's what I was interested in getting to.
Oh, right.
Do you have a hot take about Sabatini?
So I've just come back from a rather long trip to Oxford, and I took Sabatini with me. So I've had Captain Blood overseas, over the ocean. Yes, I know you all loved Captain Blood. I thought the first half of it was rather boring. I thought the second half kind of redeemed it. It got more interesting to me as it got more complicated. But I spent most of my trip in Oxford thinking, I just really don't get it.
I want to hear some outrage, Paul.
Yeah, the injustice that happens in the very first chapter just didn't get your blood boiling. You don't feel for him that he was a doctor who wanted to just help somebody who had been shot.
I totally get that. And I thought that was all good. But then beyond that, after he becomes a pirate, and it's just thing after thing. And
you did. Oh, so it wasn't the when he's early on when he's a slave.
Mm-hmm. It's like
you felt
that
like it's like the middle third was
the
boring. The
problem with that book for her is that it didn't begin with gathering all the potential suspects in the parlor.
Well, I have loved
that's exciting.
I loved Scaramouche, which is the only other Sabatini I've read. I loved the Scarlet Pimpernel. I do
Which
like.
It's not Sabatini. But
it's not Sabatini, but it is a swashbuckling. I do love the swashbuckling genre. And I just thought this book was rather weak in the first, you're right, the very beginning was good. But then after that, I thought it really could stand an editing and maybe be cut short by 100 pages. But then toward the end, I thought it got much better.
I feel like it all, at the end though, brings it all together. In the same way that like you can't cut out middle parts of the Count of Monte Cristo, because the beauty of that, one of the beautiful things about that book is at the very end, it all comes back together. You realize every word in that book led to something that you didn't see coming.
Yeah.
I don't know. I wouldn't put
I'm going to look back.
Captain Blood at the same level.
I would not either at all.
As the Count of Monte Cristo. But the fact of what he does in Captain Blood, in the part that Tanya's complaining about, does actually impact the story.
It does impact the story. I just think it could have impacted it in a shorter. So now I'm reading a book that someone loaned to me that I need to read and get back to them. And it is contemporary. I don't read a lot of contemporary lit, and it's called Horse by Geraldine Brooks. I can't remember.
Yeah.
And it's about a horse in 1850 in Lexington that was supposedly really fast. It's based on a true story. And I think this person thought I would enjoy it because I live here.
Yeah, it's a kind of a local.
It is.
Story.
It's a local story. We'll see.
Yeah.
I'm not that far in yet.
But
it seems to be well written.
Is it nonfiction or fiction?
It's fictionalized based on a real horse.
Okay.
So I don't know how much of it is
real and how much is
That's
fake.
right.
Yeah.
Well, I have to give a report from my vacation reading.
Oh,
So
did you get you were going to have like a couple of days just to read.
I was.
Oh,
and then on the drive up, I got the stomach flu.
Oh, you didn't.
And I stumbled out of the vehicle.
Oh, because your family had it.
Yeah. My wife had it. But for some reason, it like lay dormant for a week and snuck out and got me.
Oh, no.
On the first day of vacation. So we still went up there, but then I gave it to my mother-in-law who was watching Jack. So we had to cut her vacation short. So that was a bummer. And we lost a day of reading, basically. But I still finished actually two of the 3 books in the course of the vacation. And so I read Leif Anger's Virgil Wander, which was really, really good. I think I resonate with him because he's a Midwestern author. He kind of lives in North Minnesota. And this story takes place in a small city close to Duluth. And he has this way of kind of telling real to life stories that have kind of a supernatural edge to them. And so this one is about just a guy who runs a theater in a tiny little town that's dying. But there are these interesting characters that come into his life. And it's really, he's an author who writes about characters. Plot is kind of secondary. But the characters are really fascinating and funny and enjoyable.
That sounds great.
I enjoyed it a lot.
I was going to say, if there's not much plot, book. Tanya won't like it. But anyway, keep going.
It sounds good.
Yeah, a lot of people really like that novel. I tried to read it, but there was some scene where somebody walks off the tailgate of a truck and keeps walking in the air, and I'm thinking, I'm not sure, this seems rather random.
Oh, was it?
Maybe that's his other novel.
I think that's what his other novel. He does.
Yeah,
there's like a twinge of the supernatural that kind of hides at the edges, but I think it's actually not fantastical. It's actually a little bit more like
James Lee Burke does that.
Mysterious,
but differently.
No,
you think?
I do. This just seemed that particular seemed rather random to me, but I didn't get. But maybe I didn't continue, so I can't say.
I also read Jonathan Pennington after Jonathan Pennington's newest book, Come and See, which is just his kind of 30 years or 40 years of experience reading the Bible and just kind of offering some helpful guidance in how to enjoy this great work of literature. And it's a fresh take, but also in very simple, accessible language. And I thought it was really good. And then I finished the Iliad finally as well. So
you did pretty well.
So I did pretty well
after making your mother-in-law sick.
Yeah,
boy, how do you get over that?
Yeah, it wasn't good. Wasn't good for in-law relations. But Martin, what about you? What have you been reading?
Well, my wife and I are rereading Bleak House, which is a very long Dickens novel. I'm fearful of what Tanya would cut from it.
Oh, I wouldn't cut a word, not a word.
Which is supposedly his best. I don't I've read it before. I think he's one of those novelists who wrote 4 or 5 novels that are among the greatest things written in English. So it's hard to judge, but I just, my wife just really loves Dickens and the characters, and we listen to them. And I think that really, the book benefits from that when you have a really good reader who understands all the accents and all that. Because I think for a lot of beginning readers in Dickens, that's the problem they have.
It is. The dialect is rough.
Are the dialects. But if you have a reader and you're listening to it, then it's fabulous. I'm also almost finished with Christianity and Classical Culture by Yaroslav Pelikan. And it's about, we're some of us are pretty familiar with what's happening in the Western Christendom in, the 4th, 5th centuries. We think of Augustine primarily. But in the East, in Constantinople, you have the Cappadocian Fathers, St. Basil, Gregory of Nyssa, Gregory Nazianzus, and their sister Macrina, who was very influential, dealing with, what do we do with this classical heritage? And so Yaroslav Pelikan, that's Yaroslav Pelikan's book, is excellent. And then just read last weekend, The Roman Way by Edith Hamilton. Her 2 books, The Greek Way and The Roman Way, are among my favorites as a treatment of what was Greek culture all about and what was Roman culture all about and how were they different. That's just fascinating because they are different in many ways, even though the Greeks sort of inherit a lot of, the Romans sort of inherit a lot of Greek culture. There are things that are uniquely Roman that they bring to the table that in some ways are kind of conflicting with the Greeks. So it's and she's an excellent writer.
Yeah. Let's pivot then and let's talk about our topic for today. And Martin, here's the topic.
So everyone else knows, but I don't? Is that the situation?
We just found out,
We were in the office this morning.
We come in at 8.
We happened to have a conversation about the podcast, and so we settled on something.
We'll start with a prompt. And
I just choose not to participate. So there.
This prompt came actually from a listener as well. And it is this. What matters more in education? The aptitude of the student or the aptitude of the teacher?
Yes. Yeah. Obviously, education is a two-way street. You have to have teaching and you have to have learning. That's what education is. So necessarily you have to have both. I don't think you can say which one is greater. I suppose if a student's ability to learn is less than a teacher's greater ability to teach helps and balances that out. But I think, the hardest thing to do in teaching is to get the student to buy in and get the student actively interested in what you're teaching. That is the hardest thing to do. And so that involves a teacher who is able to elicit that. And, I taught for 25 years, and that was, it seemed to me my chief job. I had to know the stuff, obviously, but I'm trying to get the student to respond actively. Dewey was right, at least in this, in that, the active learning of the student is important. But what? No, I think that's.
I taught beside you. I taught beside you. Your students were definitely.
How much you learned, didn't you?
Oh, they were so engaged. We both taught Latin at the same time in adjoining classrooms. And one time, there was just such chaos coming out of Martin's classroom all the time. And one time, a student raised their hand, and I called on him, and he said, "Mrs. Charlton, why don't we get to have fun in our Latin class like Mr. Cothran's Latin class?"
Yeah, because
we're actually getting something done in here.
Yeah, because they're coming out of your class quivering because they've just taken one of your power quizzes, which is one question. If you get it right, it's 100. If you get it wrong, it's a 0. So,
this stuff is life or death.
Yes. So yes, Martin got it done, but within a lot of hysteria going on in the classroom. He definitely engaged his students. I'm not sure in what.
So he was getting buy-in. Is that what that was all about?
That was,
buy-in?
I think, my class where I had 25 students in the one class, and every single one of them learned what they needed to learn. Just saying.
Well, you had that one student too, the one that jumped out the third floor window.
Oh,
that time.
yeah.
I'm not going to mention names.
Yes.
So,
he was in
so
there,
you
yeah.
did have a situation
and he
I
learned it
didn't
too.
have. Yeah.
Can I ask if the student lived?
Yes, he did. He didn't even get hurt.
Was this
Kids
during class?
do not
I mean,
jump out of third floor windows. Just to be clear
Just
to our audience.
as a rule.
Yeah,
That's right.
that never happens at Highlands anymore.
No,
we don't have third floor windows.
There are no more third floor windows.
Because there's no third floors.
Paul, same question. What matters more, the aptitude of the student or the aptitude of the teacher?
It's a false dichotomy. It's the wrong. I mean, it's.
Go ahead and say it. It's the wrong question.
It's the wrong question. No, I was thinking about it.
I think it's actually a good question because it generates this discussion. But keep going.
That's correct for other reasons other than the concept that it brings forth. Augustine, in his work on teaching catechumens the faith, has different principles that he's writing to a church leader who's asking, like, how ought I to instruct people that want to become Christians? And he talks about education in there because you're teaching the faith, and almost everything that he talks about is the teacher-student relationship, and that there's clearly the teacher is the one driving it. The teacher's the one with the information that is imparting it, and that relationship is vital, because otherwise the student doesn't buy in, right? If the student doesn't respect the teacher, then they're not going to respect what the teacher's saying. And what I mean by respect is not just like this quivering respect, but one in which
terror, was that the word you used?
Yeah, it's not a terror. It's a respect. Like I recognize that this person has something to offer me, and those relationships all come differently. But the student has come, and then the teacher has to work to make what they are presenting something that student wants. And so you can have a really great teacher and have a student that refuses to buy in, and you can have a student that opposite, where you have a student that's very engaged and a teacher that doesn't have the talent, or isn't prepared or whatever, and that student can still learn. But when both of those are firing on all cylinders, I mean, that's where you get some great learning.
Can I ask for a definition again?
Absolutely.
When you say the aptitude of the student, are you talking about intellect? Because it doesn't matter what the aptitude of the student is. We've got to teach all students. So I'm a little confused about what we're comparing.
Well,
here.
I think when you say what matters more, the question is like, if we're looking at trying to improve what we're doing, where should we put our focus? Is it on the student or is it on the teacher?
Will a highly competent student with a mediocre teacher excel more than a mediocre student with a highly apt teacher? Which one of those situations has a better end result?
I have known students in my life who got really terrible educations but excelled because they were highly intelligent and they were motivated, and so they managed to get an education. But I think a poor teacher does a lot of damage. And I don't know, I mean, I'm like with Paul about it. This is a really kind of a crazy dichotomy. And I don't know that you could,
Well,
we're not going to have an answer.
we also need to go back to Aristotle's rhetoric, where he basically gives you the three elements of teaching, which are ethos, the trust the students have in you as a teacher, logos, your knowledge of the material, and pathos, your ability to elicit the interest of the student.
That's right.
Right. So, you may have, and you can use that same breakdown to analyze the student, which is you have, in terms of ethos, you have you have students who are not the smartest students in the room, but they work hard.
Yes.
They do all the work. On the other hand, you have students who are really intelligent. They don't have to work that hard to pick up the material. And then you have students who are who you are able as a teacher to interest in the material. Those are the three factors of teaching and learning.
I think your point about students who have that aptitude that were able to get a good education even though they weren't provided one, kind of highlights the fact that when we talk about learning, I mean, the end result is in the student, right? I mean, it's the student acquiring that information and those skills. And so, you can, a competent student or a motivated student is always going to acquire those skills and that knowledge more than a non-interested one. And so now there's a lot of things that teachers can do to elicit that, but fundamentally it has to depend on that student, right? And that student can get an education anywhere, right? It doesn't have to be in a classroom, right? So you have somebody who doesn't have access to that. I mean, the common example is Abraham Lincoln, right? Like, you can teach yourself these things. And so
Frederick Douglass, so many people in history that not educated themselves.
Yeah, not having a good teacher doesn't mean you can't get it, but having a student that's unwilling to learn does mean that they're not going to learn.
So I think some people have kind of agreed with that insight, and I think that's true. Then they look at what we have talked about on this podcast and talk about a lot in other contexts on our insistence in a teacher-centered classroom. If it's true that the learning happens within the student, why is our classroom centered on the teacher and not on the students if that's where the learning's happening?
Because most kids don't have a default attitude of wanting to learn.
My oldest son was totally indifferent to school, totally indifferent, not motivated by grades. Martin taught him, he knows. But if he had a passionate teacher, he was totally engaged and he performed for those teachers. And Martin was one of them. He performed for him because he was entertained by
See, that's important.
it is. He kept his interest and he made him interested in the material. Now, I think there's a difference too between when we talk about a poor teacher. Like the first year I taught, I was not a great teacher. I made a lot of mistakes and I learned along the way. And so students can get by with that. We all have new teachers and think about homeschooling. The first time you teach D'Aulaire's Greek myths is going to be different than the third time you teach it. And so you are going to get better. And the students do survive those mistakes that we make. But I think that's our emphasis on curriculum and on if you give a new teacher or a teacher that needs help a good solid foundation in curriculum, they should be able to get the job done. And then hopefully they will get better and become master teachers. But I do think that's an important thing that we've got to talk about a little bit is you've got to equip the teachers in order for them to get the job done and get it done consistently. So if you've got 4 fourth grades and you have a new teacher here and a master teacher here, the students are still getting the same information, but this new teacher is working toward becoming that master.
Right. You talked about, you asked me kind of in clarifying, what do we mean by aptitude of the student? You could talk about intelligence and you could also talk about maybe interest.
Motivation.
Well, yeah. What are the other aptitudes students have? Oh, no. Paul, any other things that you could think kind of a student ought to have? And if you're a teacher kind of thinking about what you are hoping to elicit from students, or what, if you're a parent kind of looking at, this is what my student needs to be challenged by, what other aptitudes students need to be acquiring that are maybe meta to the learning that they're actually doing?
I don't know if it's an aptitude, but what keeps going through my head is wonder, right? I mean, is an inquiring mind, one that one that doesn't just, because we do train the kids basically like, here's this answer to this, right? But one that, a student that sits there and goes, wow, like, and that's actually interesting, or that's actually amazing, or that needs to be contemplated. Having that sort of attitude, will make them thirst to know more and go beyond maybe what the class is offering.
And that's really what we're after. It does go beyond the curriculum to wonder. I mean, that is it. If we get wonder, then I think we've done our jobs.
Let me try to land the plane and summarize how we've answered this question. It sounds like what we're saying is that the aptitude of the student matters, but a student isn't perhaps hopeless if they have a great teacher, if that teacher can draw it out of them. And in reverse, a student is not hopeless if the teacher is mediocre, but is always going to be helped by having a more apt teacher. And so it seems like there is kind of it's a both and in both ways, that it's not a hopeless situation if it's a mediocre student or a mediocre teacher, but what you're always striving for is aptitude with both.
Right. I don't think any student is hopeless. And I found, honestly, when I was teaching, that the students who were not engaged, or the students who weren't as smart, where things didn't come as easily to them, they were the most fun to teach, because there was always that challenge of what can I do to engage these students, to make them come alongside everybody else and to help them. I think that's a great challenge for a teacher. Now, I didn't enjoy it so much with my own children. I really wanted them to be motivated, good students, because I was always motivated as a student. So, that was difficult. But in the classroom where I could be more objective, I really enjoyed those students that I had to bring along.
Sure. Martin, you scribbled in your notebook.
I was just
He's
furthering on my 3 elements of teaching and learning. Which
you don't do the groceries, do you?
No, I don't. Which are, you work hard, you're smart, or you're interested. Those are the three things. And I don't know there's really a fourth. Some students come to you from every different kind of direction. And if you've got a student who just won't work, that's going to be a problem. You got to push that child. A student can come to you smart, but completely uninterested in what's going on. And that's, it seems to me with boys, that is almost the norm. They're smart enough. They just don't want to work. They don't want to put anything into it. And you got to pull them a little bit. And then you have students who are not interested, and with a student who's interested, you just got to point, pushing, pulling, and pointing. I mean, and they will do it because they are self-motivated.
Yes. Those are fun students too. They're all fun students.
Absolutely.
They're all challenging in different ways.
Well, and it's a challenge to get the, to get the one student who maybe is just not interested. I mean, that's the way, to me, it was like, okay, so my challenge this semester is get that student interested in what we're doing. And I'm remembering the student who jumped out of the third floor window, particularly in this instance. And he was a little bit of trouble because they're not interested. They're bored. They want something to happen. So they make something interesting, something they'll be interested in happen.
Right.
And so you just, you're calling on people and I can't remember the name of that child. We'll call him Johnny. And then I'd go over asking questions. I say, Johnny, what's the genitive singular of some Latin word? And then I go to the next person. He thinks he's got away from me. And I go, and then I ask him again. And then I ask him again in sequence. And then I'll go to a couple of, and then I'll ask him again. I mean, you gotta handle those students.
One
in a particular
time,
way.
Your class there was a lot of laughter coming out of your class, and I walked in to see what was going on, and you had this child teaching the class.
I think I did. Yeah,
I said, because he was misbehaving.
You clearly have no need to hear me. That you must know this material. Going up there, I hand him a piece of chalk, and
and he was teaching the class.
I don't advise that in every situation.
You've gotten a lot of good tips, I feel like, from this little bit. And
Right. But as far as the teacher goes, teaching's a really hard job. And I think not everybody's called to it. And I think it's really important. I see great teachers all the time in the places that I go, and you do too. All of us have visited lots of classrooms. And sometimes you see a teacher who knows that material, has it down, lectures really well, engaging, but has no idea what the class is doing or whether the class is actually engaged because they're so intent on their material and what they're teaching that they're not building a relationship with the students, and they're not seeing that student in the back row is doing their Latin homework, or this student over here is building a tower with his highlighters. Or, it's not that the teacher's not teaching, but it's not just teaching. It's also looking those students in the eye and recognizing what they're doing and making sure that they are involved in this community situation that you've got going here. So there are these different kinds of students.
Well, and the chief reason that doesn't happen, I think, in many cases, is what you're talking about, looking a student in the eye. Teaching requires confidence. I mean real strong confidence, because it takes confidence to look a student in the eye and really engage that student.
Especially high school.
Or
middle school.
Yeah.
What about middle school?
And some teachers, particularly new teachers, just don't have that confidence. You got to teach a while to have confidence.
That's true. And so, you do. And I think that's a good point. Is the curriculum then can become a crutch because you've really prepped. You've done your job. You've worked all weekend to get ready to teach, and you stand up there and you're teaching and half your class isn't paying any attention. You're doing your job, but part of your job is to actually know those students and be able to really realize this is the student that I need to work with, and this student needs to move.
It's a lot of multitasking.
Yeah, it's like a dance.
It's very much, you have to be keeping several things up at the same time because you got to be communicating that information while you're looking at the kids, while you've noticed this child over here has no soccer shoe on one foot, and then the other child's falling asleep, and you've got to then be walking around and taking care of those things while the lecture keeps going, and it's difficult.
Which is why teaching is so utterly exhausting.
It is exhausting.
I could not do that now. I couldn't even do a quarter of a day now because it is so. You have to be a young person to teach.
Well, you're on.
Yes.
It's like you're on for hours and hours. Right. Literally, it's like being an entertainer.
But it's a worthwhile work. And let me tell you a story to end our time here of redemption. When I was in 7th grade, I had a teacher who was trying to do this, be aware of her students, one of them being me. And she asked me, Mr. Saxon, are you bored right now?
Oh.
And I thought it was a real question. I didn't realize it was a teaching moment.
No, she was trying to elicit information.
Yes. And she's like, go to the principal's office right now.
Oh,
and I got sent to the principal's office. Yeah.
Wow.
But you know what?
Well,
I became interested later on.
So what did the principal do?
Yeah, he kind of got mad at me. Told me I needed to not be bored and to turn my attitude around.
Okay.
And I have been, I've become interested in education. Look at me now.
Look at you now.
Yeah.
You need to write a letter.
It wasn't because of her. Like that class was boring. And
yes.
But later on, I became interested. So take hope.
Yeah, that's a good point because a teacher can really change your life. I remember, and I don't remember any of my teachers' names, but I remember this guy's name. He was the bonehead English teacher at the University of California at Irvine, my freshman year. And Mr. Meenan was his name. And I remember writing a paper and him coming back with his comments on the paper. And I had done a little work on the high school newspaper, and I never, but got a D in composition. Okay. So Mr. Meenan wrote on there, this is really good. You need to be a humanities major. I remember I can see it to this day. And that changed the course of what it just reoriented me in terms of what I wanted to do, and I ended up becoming a writer. So
they can be,
cool.
Teachers can be very influential, but they can also be boring.
True. Well, thank you guys for this discussion. It hasn't been boring. We'll see you next time. Thank you for listening to this episode of Classical Etc. If you enjoyed this conversation, please consider liking this video. If you want to join the conversation, then you can comment below. And if you want to stay connected, please subscribe to our channel. I hope you enjoyed this show, and we'll see you next time.